The gunshot that shattered Grace Gardner's wedding vows was meant for her groom, but it might as well have struck her heart clean through. Blood pooled on the church floor as Thomas collapsed, his eyes going wide with shock before the light faded from them completely, and Grace stood frozen in her white dress, now splattered with crimson, while screams erupted around her. The man who had promised to love her forever was dead before he could even say, "I do." And something inside Grace died right alongside him that scorching August day in 1881. 2 years had passed since that terrible afternoon in Sacramento, and Grace had rebuilt what remained of her shattered life in the remote settlement of Jordan Valley, Oregon. The high desert town sat in the shadow of the Awahi Mountains, a place where cattle ranchers and their hands came to trade, drink, and forget whatever troubles had driven them to the edge of civilization. Grace had chosen Jordan Valley precisely because it was the kind of place where people did not ask too many questions about your past. She had purchased a small boarding house with the money Thomas had left her, and she kept to herself, maintaining a careful distance from everyone who crossed her threshold. The boarding house was a simple 2-story structure with whitewashed walls that had long since faded to a dull gray under the relentless sun. Grace kept 6 rooms available for travelers, and she ran the establishment with efficient precision. She cooked meals, changed linens, collected rent, and spoke only when absolutely necessary. The men who stayed there found her polite but cold, beautiful but untouchable. At 24 years old, Grace had the kind of delicate features and honey-colored hair that should have attracted suitors by the dozen, but there was something in her green eyes that warned people away. It was the look of a woman who had already lost everything that mattered and who had no intention of risking her heart again. The other women in Jordan Valley whispered about her. They said she was proud, standoffish, unnatural in her solitude. Grace did not care what they said. She had learned that love was a dangerous illusion, a trick that made you vulnerable to the cruelest kind of pain. Better to be alone, to be safe behind walls of her own making, than to ever again feel the agony of watching someone she loved die before her eyes. Yates Xavier rode into Jordan Valley on a dust-covered gelding during the first week of October, when the air had finally begun to cool from the blistering heat of summer. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin, his dark hair falling past his collar beneath a worn Stetson. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent most of his 30 years in the saddle, working cattle drives from Texas to Montana, and everywhere in between. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and eyes the color of storm clouds that seemed to notice everything around him. Yates had come to Jordan Valley to meet with a rancher about a job managing a herd through the winter, but the meeting was not scheduled until the following day. He needed a place to stay, and the boarding house on Main Street seemed as good as any. He tied his horse to the hitching post outside, grabbed his saddlebags, and climbed the 3 wooden steps to the front door. Grace was in the kitchen when she heard the bell above the door chime. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked out to the front room, preparing to greet another nameless traveler with her usual practice courtesy. But when she saw the man standing in her entryway, something made her pause. He was watching her with an expression of open curiosity, and there was a gentleness in his eyes that seemed out of place in a man who clearly made his living through hard physical labor. "I need a room for a few nights," Yates said, removing his hat. "Possibly longer, depending on how my business goes." $2 a night, Grace replied, her voice professionally neutral. "That includes breakfast and supper. I do not allow drinking or gambling in the rooms." "Fair enough." Yates reached into his pocket and counted out 6 silver dollars, placing them on the desk between them. 3 nights to start. Grace picked up the coins and tucked them into the locked box she kept beneath the counter. She retrieved a key from the board on the wall and held it out to him. "Second floor, last room on the right. Supper is at 6 o'clock. Their fingers brushed as Yates took the key, and Grace pulled her hand back quickly as if burned. She turned away, pretending to busy herself with paperwork, waiting for him to go upstairs. But instead, he lingered. "I appreciate the hospitality," Yates said. "This seems like a well-run establishment. Thank you." Grace kept her eyes on the ledger in front of her, her pen scratching across the page as she recorded his payment. "I am Yates Xavier," he continued. "Since I will be staying here, I figured I should introduce myself properly." Grace looked up then, meeting his gaze for just a moment before looking away again. "Grace Gardner. Welcome to Jordan Valley, Mr. Xavier. Just Yates is fine." He smiled, and there was something warm and genuine in that smile that made Grace's chest tighten uncomfortably. "I look forward to your cooking, Miss Gardner." He headed up the stairs then, his boots heavy on the wooden steps, and Grace let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. She pressed her palms flat against the desk and closed her eyes, willing her heartbeat to slow. This was nothing. He was just another guest, another man passing through on his way to somewhere else. In a few days, he would be gone, and she would forget his storm-gray eyes and the way his smile had made her feel something she thought she had buried 2 years ago. That evening, Grace prepared supper for her guests. Roasted chicken, potatoes, green beans, and fresh bread. She had 3 other boarders at the moment, all of them ranch hands who worked at the surrounding spreads and kept rooms in town for when they had time off. They were rough men who ate quickly and spoke little, which suited Grace just fine. She served the meal at the long table in the dining room and then retreated to the kitchen, as was her habit. She always ate alone after the men had finished, but when she came out to clear the dishes, she found Yates still sitting at the table, a cup of coffee in his hands. The other men had already gone upstairs or out to the saloon. "Is something wrong with the meal?" Grace asked, keeping her voice carefully polite. "No, madam, everything was delicious." Yates set down his cup and looked at her directly. "Best chicken I have had in months, maybe years." "Then why are you still here? I noticed you did not eat with us. Seemed a shame, you cooking such a fine meal and not getting to enjoy the company while you eat it." Grace began stacking the dirty plates with efficient movements. "I prefer to eat after my guests have finished." "It is easier that way." Easier or lonelier? The question caught her off guard, and Grace's hand stilled for a moment before she resumed her work. "I do not find solitude lonely, Mr. Xavier. I find it peaceful." "Yates," he corrected gently, "and I did not mean any offense. I just thought maybe you might appreciate some conversation." "I appreciate efficient work and prompt payment," Grace said, her tone cooling. "I am not here to provide conversation." Yates stood then, picking up his own plate and cup to carry them to the kitchen. Grace wanted to tell him to stop, that guests did not clear their own dishes, but the words caught in her throat. She followed him into the kitchen and found him setting the dishes beside the wash basin. "You do not have to do that," she managed. "I know." He turned to face her, and again she was struck by the gentleness in his eyes. "But my mama raised me to be helpful, especially to a woman who just served me an excellent meal." Grace set down her stack of plates and crossed her arms over her chest, a defensive posture she had perfected over the past 2 years. "Mr. Xavier, I appreciate the gesture, but I would prefer if you treated this establishment like what it is, a business. I am not looking for friendship or conversation or anything else. I provide a clean room and hot meals, and in return, you pay me. That is the extent of our relationship." Something flickered across Yates's face, a flash of what might have been disappointment or understanding or both. But he nodded and moved toward the door. "As you wish, Miss Gardner. Thank you again for the meal." After he left, Grace stood in her kitchen surrounded by dirty dishes, and she felt a confusing mixture of relief and regret. She had done the right thing, establishing boundaries before he could get any ideas about her being available for romance or companionship. She had learned the hard way what happened when you let someone into your heart. It was better this way, safer this way. So why did she feel so hollow as she washed the dishes alone in the fading evening light? The next morning, Grace rose before dawn as she always did. She lit the stove, prepared coffee, and began mixing batter for biscuits. Breakfast was served at 7 o'clock sharp, and she prided herself on always being ready on time. As she worked, her mind drifted back to the man upstairs, to Yates Xavier with his storm-gray eyes and his offer of conversation. She wondered what his business in Jordan Valley was, whether he would stay beyond the 3 nights he had paid for, and then she firmly pushed those thoughts away. It did not matter. She did not care. But when Yates came down for breakfast and smiled at her over his coffee cup, Grace felt that same uncomfortable tightness in her chest, and she knew she was lying to herself. Over the following days, Yates fell into a routine. He would leave early in the morning for his meetings with the rancher, return in the late afternoon, and spend the evening reading in the front room or sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. He was always polite to Grace, always respectful of the boundaries she had set, but there was something in the way he looked at her that made her feel seen in a way she had not experienced in years. On the 4th day, Yates paid for another week in advance. "The job is going well," he explained as he counted out the bills. "The rancher wants me to stay on through the winter, help him build up his operation. I will need somewhere to stay until I can figure out more permanent arrangements." Grace took the money and marked it in her ledger. "You are welcome to stay as long as you need. I appreciate that." Yates paused, his hat in his hands. "Miss Gardner, would it be all right if I asked you a question?" Grace's spine stiffened. "What kind of question?" "A personal one, but I promise it comes from a place of respect, not curiosity." She should have said no. She should have reminded him that their relationship was strictly business. But instead she heard herself say, "You may ask, I may not answer." "Fair enough." Yates met her eyes and his expression was serious. "Whatever happened to you, whatever made you build these walls around yourself, it must have hurt terribly. I am sorry for that, but I want you to know that not every man in this world is going to cause you pain." Grace felt her throat tighten. "You do not know anything about me." "I know that you are kind, even when you try to hide it. I have seen you slip extra food to the older ranch hand who cannot afford to eat well. I have watched you mend a torn shirt for one of the other guests without being asked. I know that you work yourself to exhaustion every day, probably so you do not have time to think about whatever it is that haunts you." "Stop." The word came out sharper than Grace intended. "You have no right to analyze me, Mr. Xavier. You are a guest in my establishment, nothing more." "You are right, and I apologize." Yates put his hat back on. "But Grace, I want you to know something. I am not going anywhere for a while, and I am not going to pressure you or make you uncomfortable. But if you ever want to talk, if you ever want a friend, I am here." He left then, heading out to his job at the ranch, and Grace stood alone in the front room with tears burning behind her eyes. She had not cried since Thomas's funeral, had not allowed herself that weakness, but Yates's words had cracked something inside her. The kindness in his voice, the genuine concern in his eyes, it was too much. It made her remember what it felt like to be cared for, to matter to someone, and that memory was more painful than any physical wound. That evening, Grace found herself cooking with more care than usual. She made a pot roast with vegetables, cornbread with honey butter, and an apple pie for dessert. She told herself it was because she had the ingredients and they needed to be used, but she knew the truth. Some part of her, some small broken piece that refused to stay buried, wanted to do something nice for Yates Xavier. When she served supper, Yates's eyes lit up at the sight of the pie. "Miss Gardner, you have outdone yourself." "It is just food," Grace said, but her voice was softer than usual. After the meal, as she cleared the table, Yates once again remained behind. Grace prepared herself for another conversation she was not ready to have, but instead he simply said, "Would you like help with the dishes?" Grace wanted to say no. She wanted to maintain her distance, to keep him at arm's length where he could not hurt her. But she was tired of being alone, tired of carrying everything by herself, tired of pretending that her isolation was a choice rather than a prison. "All right," she heard herself say. They worked in silence at first, Yates washing while Grace dried and put away. The quiet between them was not uncomfortable, and Grace found herself relaxing slightly, her shoulders loosening from their perpetual defensive hunch. After a while, Yates began to talk about his day, about the cattle and the land and the rancher's plans for the future. He did not ask Grace anything about herself, did not push for information she was not ready to give. He just talked, filling the kitchen with the sound of a human voice, and Grace realized how much she had missed that simple comfort. "The land here is beautiful," Yates said as he scrubbed a pot. "Different from Texas, where I grew up, but beautiful in its own way. All that open space and sky, those mountains in the distance, makes a man feel small and significant all at once." "I have not really looked at it that way," Grace admitted. "I suppose I have been too focused on surviving to appreciate the view." Yates glanced at her and Grace immediately regretted saying so much, but he just nodded. "Surviving is important, but eventually you have to start living again too. What if I do not know how anymore?" The question slipped out before Grace could stop it, and she felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. She turned away, focusing intently on drying the pot in her hands. "Then you learn," Yates said simply. "One small step at a time. Maybe you start by having a conversation with someone. Maybe you take a walk just to see the sunset. Maybe you let yourself enjoy a piece of that apple pie you made without feeling guilty about it." Grace set down the pot and the towel, her hands trembling slightly. "It is not that simple. No, it is not. Nothing worthwhile ever is." Yates dried his hands and turned to face her fully. "But Grace, whatever happened to you, however badly you were hurt, you are still here. You survived, and that means you are stronger than you think. You do not understand." Grace's voice cracked, and she hated herself for that show of weakness. "I watched the man I was going to marry die on our wedding day. Someone shot him during the ceremony, right there in front of everyone. He died in my arms, and I could not do anything to save him. So do not tell me about being strong or learning to live again, because I already tried that. I tried to love someone, and it destroyed me." The words hung in the air between them, and Grace waited for Yates to back away, to realize she was too broken, too damaged, too much trouble. But instead he stepped closer, his expression filled with a compassion that made her chest ache. "I am so sorry," he said quietly. "No one should have to endure something like that." "It was 2 years ago," Grace said, trying to regain her composure. "I have moved past it." "Have you?" "Because from where I am standing, it looks like you are still living in that moment, still letting it control every choice you make." Anger flared in Grace's chest, hot and defensive. "You have known me for less than a week. You do not get to tell me how I am living my life." "You are right, I do not. Yates's voice remained calm, gentle. "But I can tell you what I see. I see a woman who is terrified to let anyone close because she is afraid they will be taken from her. I see someone who has convinced herself that being alone is safer than risking her heart. And I see someone who is slowly dying inside even though she is still breathing. Get out." Grace's voice shook with emotion. "Get out of my kitchen." Yates held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Grace, I did not mean to upset you." "Well, you did. I want you to leave. Not just the kitchen, the boarding house. I want you out." "All right." Yates moved toward the door, but he paused before leaving. "For what it is worth, I think you are incredibly brave for surviving what you did. And I think the man who died loving you would not want you to spend the rest of your life hiding from the world. He would want you to be happy." Then he was gone, his footsteps heavy on the stairs, and Grace was alone again. She sank into a chair and pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to overwhelm her. How dare he? How dare he come into her life and presume to understand her pain, to judge her choices, to make her feel things she had sworn never to feel again? But even as anger pulsed through her veins, Grace knew that Yates had spoken the truth. She was hiding. She was letting fear control her. She had built a life that was safe but empty, and somewhere deep inside, she knew it could not continue forever. The next morning, Grace expected to find that Yates had packed his things and left. She would have to refund him some of his rent money, but that was fine. It was better this way, better to be alone than to let someone see her wounds so clearly. But when she came downstairs, she found Yates sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee already poured. He looked up when she entered, and his expression was open, hopeful. "I made coffee," he said. "I hope that is all right. I figured after last night I owed you at least that much." Grace stood in the doorway, uncertain. "I told you to leave. You did, and I considered it. But then I realized that running away when things get difficult is not my style." He pushed one of the coffee cups toward the empty chair across from him. "Please sit. I promise I will not push or pry. I just want to apologize properly." Against her better judgment, Grace sat. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup and stared into the dark liquid, unable to meet his eyes. "I am sorry for what I said last night," Yates began. "I had no right to speak to you that way, to make assumptions about your life or your grief. That was wrong of me, and I am truly sorry." "You are not entirely wrong," Grace admitted quietly. "That is why it hurts so much. Still, I should have been more careful with my words. Pain like yours deserves respect, not judgment." They sat in silence for a moment, and then Grace found herself speaking, the words coming easier than she expected. "His name was Thomas. We had known each other since we were children, growing up in the same neighborhood in Sacramento. He was kind and funny and patient with me. When he proposed, I said yes because I truly believed we would have a good life together." "What happened?" Yates asked gently. "Who shot him?" "A man who had been courting me before Thomas. I had rejected him, told him I was not interested, but he could not accept that. He showed up at the church with a gun, saying that if he could not have me, no one would. He aimed at me, but Thomas stepped in front of the bullet." Grace's voice wavered, but she forced herself to continue. "Everyone said Thomas was a hero. They said he died protecting the woman he loved. But all I could think was that it was my fault. If I had been kinder to the other man, if I had handled the rejection better, maybe he would not have done what he did. Grace, look at me." Yates waited until she raised her eyes to his. "What that man did was not your fault. You have the right to reject someone without fearing they will turn violent. Thomas's death was tragic, but it was not because of anything you did or did not do. It was because one man made an evil choice." "I know that in my head," Grace whispered, "but my heart has not caught up yet." That is understandable. Grief does not follow a logical path. Yates reached across the table, his hand palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. But you do not have to carry it alone anymore. Not if you do not want to. Grace looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. It would be so easy to take it, to accept the comfort and connection he was offering. But it would also make her vulnerable again, open her up to the possibility of more pain. "I am afraid," she said, her voice barely audible. "I know. And that is all right. Fear is not weakness, it is wisdom. It means you understand the risks." Yates's hand remained steady, patient. "But Grace, not every risk ends in tragedy. Sometimes taking a chance leads to something beautiful." Grace thought about Thomas, about the way he had loved her with his whole heart, about the way his last act on earth had been to protect her. Would he want her to spend the rest of her life alone, paralyzed by fear? Or would he want her to honor his sacrifice by living fully, by opening herself up to the possibility of joy again? Slowly, hesitantly, Grace reached out and placed her hand in Yates's. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and for the first time in 2 years, Grace felt something other than grief and fear. She felt hope. Over the following weeks, Grace and Yates developed a careful friendship. They had coffee together in the mornings before he left for work, and they washed dishes together in the evenings while talking about their days. Yates told her stories about his life as a cowboy, about cattle drives and wild horses and sleeping under the stars. Grace found herself sharing memories from her childhood, stories about her parents and her siblings, things she had not talked about in years. Yates was patient with her, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. When she had bad days, when the memories of Thomas became too heavy, Yates simply sat with her in comfortable silence, his presence a reminder that she was not alone. When she had good days, when she laughed at one of his stories or smiled without forcing it, Yates's face would light up as if she had given him the greatest gift. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Yates said, "I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" Grace asked, pulling her shawl tighter against the cooling air. "About what you said, about believing no man could love you again." Yates turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I want to prove you wrong about that." Grace's heart began to race. "Yates, I do not know if I am ready for this. I am not asking you to be ready right now. I am just asking you to consider the possibility." He shifted in his chair to face her more fully. "Grace, I have spent enough time with you to know that you are an extraordinary woman. You are strong and kind and resilient. You have been through hell and come out the other side still capable of compassion. Any man would be lucky to have your love." "That is not true," Grace protested. "I am broken, damaged. I have too much pain, too much baggage." "You are not broken. You are healing, and that is different." Yates reached out and took her hand. "Let me show you what true love is, Grace. Let me show you that you are worthy of being cherished, that your past does not define your future, that opening your heart again is not a betrayal of Thomas but an honor to his memory." Grace felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I am so afraid of losing someone again." "I know. And I cannot promise that nothing bad will ever happen, because life does not work that way. But I can promise that I will not take your love for granted. I can promise that every day I have with you will be a gift I treasure. And I can promise that I will spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy, if you will let me." Grace looked at this man who had come into her life just a few weeks ago, this cowboy who had seen past her defenses to the wounded heart beneath. She thought about the way he made her laugh, the way his presence had begun to fill the empty spaces in her life, the way he looked at her as if she was precious and valuable and whole. "I do not know if I can do this," she whispered. "You do not have to know right now. Just think about it." Yates squeezed her hand gently. "I am not going anywhere, Grace. I will be right here waiting for as long as it takes." That night, Grace lay awake in her bed, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to run, to push Yates away before he could get any closer, before his presence in her life became necessary rather than optional. But another part of her, the part that had been slowly awakening over the past weeks, wanted to take the risk. She wanted to see where this connection with Yates might lead. She wanted to believe that she could be happy again. The next morning, Grace made a decision. She woke early and dressed with care, choosing her blue dress instead of her usual gray one. She fixed her hair, pinching her cheeks to bring color to them, and when Yates came down for breakfast, she greeted him with a genuine smile. "You look beautiful," Yates said, and the admiration in his eyes made Grace's stomach flutter. "Thank you." Grace poured him coffee and set a plate of eggs and bacon in front of him. "Yates, about what you said last night, I've been thinking about it." And his voice was carefully neutral, but Grace could see the hope in his eyes. "And I want to try. I am still afraid, and I do not know if I am capable of giving you what you deserve, but I want to try." Yates stood so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. He crossed to where Grace stood and took both her hands in his. "You will not regret this, I promise you that." "I hope not," Grace said, and then, before she could lose her courage, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was a soft, tentative kiss, nothing like the passionate embraces she had shared with Thomas. But it was real and present and filled with possibility, and when Yates's arms came around her, Grace allowed herself to melt into his embrace. For the first time in 2 years, she felt safe in a man's arms. She felt like she might actually have a future beyond just surviving. As autumn deepened into winter, Grace and Yates's relationship blossomed. They spent every available moment together, and Grace found herself falling in love despite her fears. Yates was nothing like Thomas, and at first that had worried her. But gradually, she came to appreciate the differences. Where Thomas had been gentle and reserved, Yates was passionate and expressive. Where Thomas had been content with routine, Yates sought adventure and new experiences. He challenged Grace to step outside her comfort zone, to try things she would never have considered on her own. One Saturday in November, Yates borrowed a wagon and took Grace on a picnic in the foothills of the Awahi Mountains. The day was clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue, and Grace bundled herself in layers of wool and fur. They drove for an hour before Yates found a spot he liked, a small clearing with a view of the valley below. "This is beautiful," Grace breathed, looking out at the endless expanse of land spread before them. "Not as beautiful as you," Yates said, and though the line was corny, the sincerity in his voice made Grace blush. They spread a blanket on the ground and ate the lunch Grace had packed: sandwiches, cheese, apples, and cookies. As they ate, Yates told her about his childhood in Texas, about his parents who had died when he was 19, about his decision to leave home and make his way as a cowboy. "You ever regret it?" Grace asked. "Leaving everything behind and just wandering from place to place?" "I used to think that was freedom," Yates said thoughtfully. "Never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots, always being ready to move on to the next job. But now I realize it was just another form of running away. I was avoiding commitment, avoiding the risk of caring too much about a place or a person." "What changed?" Yates looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes made Grace's breath catch. "You did. Meeting you made me realize that putting down roots is not a trap, it is a foundation. And caring about someone, really caring, is not a weakness. It is the bravest thing a person can do." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "I feel the same way. You have given me something I thought I lost forever. You have given me hope." "Then we have given each other a gift," Yates said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "Speaking of which, I have something for you." Grace took the box with trembling hands and opened it. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a small pendant in the shape of a heart. It was simple but beautiful, and Grace could tell it had been carefully chosen. "Yates, it is lovely, but you should not have spent your money on me." "Why not? You are worth spending money on." He took the necklace from the box and moved behind her to fasten it around her neck. "I know it is not much, but I wanted you to have something that reminded you that your heart is not broken, Grace. It has just been waiting for the right person to hold it." Grace touched the pendant, feeling the smooth metal beneath her fingers. "Thank you. I will treasure it always." As winter settled over Jordan Valley, bringing cold winds and occasional snow, Grace and Yates's relationship continued to deepen. The other residents of the town had begun to notice, and Grace sometimes caught people whispering when she walked by. The women who had once judged her for her solitude now judged her for moving on too quickly, for disrespecting Thomas's memory by falling in love again. But Grace found that she cared less and less about their opinions. For the first time since Thomas's death, she was living for herself rather than hiding from the world. On Christmas Eve, Yates invited Grace to accompany him to the church social. It would be their first public appearance as a couple, and Grace was nervous about facing the scrutiny of the community. But Yates held her hand as they walked into the church hall, and his presence gave her strength. The hall was decorated with pine boughs and candles, and long tables groaned under the weight of food brought by the townspeople. Children ran around laughing while adults stood in clusters talking and drinking hot cider. When Grace and Yates entered, conversations paused and Grace felt the weight of dozens of eyes on them. "Ignore them," Yates murmured in her ear. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." They found seats at one of the tables and served themselves from the communal dishes. Slowly, people began to approach them, curiosity overcoming their judgment. The rancher Yates worked for stopped by to tell Grace she was looking well. The woman who owned the general store asked about the boarding house. Even the minister came over to wish them a Merry Christmas. As the evening progressed, Grace felt herself relaxing. Not everyone approved of her relationship with Yates, but not everyone disapproved either. And the ones who mattered, the ones who had shown her kindness over the past years, seemed genuinely happy for her. Later, as they walked back to the boarding house under a sky full of stars, Yates said, "That was not so bad, was it?" "No, it was not," Grace admitted. "Thank you for being there with me. I do not think I could have done it alone." "You will never have to do anything alone again, not if I have anything to say about it." Yates stopped walking and turned to face her. "Grace, I love you. I know it might seem too soon, or maybe you are not ready to hear it, but I need you to know how I feel. You are the most incredible woman I have ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." Grace felt her heart swell with emotion. The words she had thought she would never say again rose to her lips, and this time she did not push them back down. "I love you too, Yates. I was not sure I was capable of feeling this way again, but you have shown me that my heart is not dead, just dormant. You have brought me back to life." Yates pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and this kiss was different from their first tentative embrace. This kiss was full of passion and promise, a declaration of love and commitment. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless. "Marry me," Yates said suddenly. "I know it is fast, but I am certain about this. I want you to be my wife, Grace. I want to build a life with you right here in Jordan Valley. What do you say?" Grace's first instinct was to say no, to point out all the reasons why it was too soon, why she was not ready, why they should wait. But then she looked into Yates's storm-gray eyes and saw nothing but love and certainty. She thought about how he had patiently broken down her walls, how he had shown her that love did not have to end in tragedy, how he had given her a reason to believe in the future again. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I will marry you." Yates let out a whoop of joy that echoed through the quiet street. He picked Grace up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her again, and Grace felt a happiness so complete it was almost painful. "I promise you will not regret this," Yates said. "I am going to spend every day making you happy." "You already do," Grace replied, "just by being yourself." They decided to have a small, simple wedding in February, giving them time to plan and prepare without drawing too much attention. Grace did not want a repeat of her first wedding attempt, with all its pomp and tragedy. This time, she wanted something intimate and meaningful, surrounded only by people who truly cared about them. As the weeks passed and their wedding day approached, Grace found herself surprisingly calm. There were moments when fear would creep in, when she would remember standing at the altar with Thomas and hearing the gunshot that ended his life. But Yates was always there to remind her that this was a different time, a different place, a different love. He never dismissed her fears or told her she was being irrational. He simply held her and promised that everything would be all right. Grace also found herself thinking more about Thomas, but in a different way than before. Instead of focusing on his death, she began to remember their life together, the happy moments they had shared. She remembered the way he had made her laugh, the way he had supported her dreams, the way he had loved her unconditionally. And she realized that honoring his memory did not mean staying frozen in grief. It meant living the kind of full, joyful life he would have wanted for her. One evening, as she and Yates sat in the front room of the boarding house, Grace said, "I need to tell you something about Thomas." "All right." Yates set down the book he had been reading and gave her his full attention. "I loved him very much, and I always will. He was a good man who died trying to protect me, and I will never forget that." Grace took a deep breath. "But the love I had for him is different from the love I have for you. With Thomas, it was comfortable and safe, like coming home. With you, it is passionate and exciting, like discovering a new horizon. Both are real, both are valid, but they are not the same." "I understand," Yates said gently. "And I am not asking you to forget Thomas or to love me the way you loved him. I am just asking for a place in your heart, whatever shape that takes." "You have more than a place," Grace said, moving closer to him. "You have taken up residence in every corner of my heart. You have shown me that I am capable of loving again, that my heart is not broken beyond repair. You have given me a future, Yates, and I will be forever grateful for that." Yates pulled her into his lap and held her close. "You have given me something too, you know. Before I met you, I was just drifting through life, never staying anywhere long enough to matter. But you have made me want to stay, to build something permanent. You have given me a home, Grace, and not just the physical kind. You have given me somewhere to belong." They sat together in the fading light, wrapped in each other's arms, and Grace felt a peace she had not known in years. The road to this moment had been long and painful, filled with grief and fear and doubt. But she had made it through, and on the other side, she had found not just survival but genuine happiness. The day of the wedding dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow covering the ground and icicles hanging from the eaves of the boarding house. Grace woke early, her stomach fluttering with nerves and excitement. She had chosen to wear a simple dress in pale green rather than white, a deliberate choice to differentiate this wedding from her first attempt. She fixed her hair in a simple style and pinned a few winter flowers to the side. The ceremony was to be held in the minister's parlor rather than the church, another deliberate choice. Only a handful of people were invited. The rancher Yates worked for and his wife, the woman from the general store who had been kind to Grace, and a few of the regular boarders who had become almost like family. As Grace descended the stairs of the boarding house, she found Yates waiting for her at the bottom. He was dressed in a clean suit, his dark hair combed back, and the look on his face when he saw her took her breath away. "You are so beautiful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "So are you," Grace replied, and then they both laughed, breaking the tension. They walked to the minister's house together, their hands clasped, and Grace marveled at how different this felt from her first wedding day. Then, she had been nervous and excited but also somewhat detached, as if she was watching herself go through the motions. Now she felt fully present, aware of every sensation, every emotion. She was choosing this, actively and consciously, and that made all the difference. The ceremony itself was brief and beautiful. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and bad. When it came time for the vows, Yates took Grace's hands and looked into her eyes. "Grace Gardner, I vow to love you with every breath in my body. I vow to stand by you through whatever challenges come our way. I vow to make you laugh when you are sad, to hold you when you are scared, and to remind you every single day how incredible you are. I vow to honor your past while building our future. And I vow to spend the rest of my life showing you what true love is." Grace felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears, tears of joy rather than grief. "Yates Xavier, I vow to trust you with my heart, even though it has been broken before. I vow to be honest with you about my fears and my hopes, my doubts and my dreams. I vow to support you in your work and your passions. I vow to build a home with you, a life with you, a future with you. And I vow to love you with all that I am, for all the days I am given." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and told Yates he could kiss his bride, Grace felt a moment of panic. This was real now, irrevocable. She was married again, had opened herself up to the possibility of loss again. But then Yates's lips met hers, and all her fears melted away. This was right. This was good. This was exactly where she was supposed to be. The small group celebrated with cake and cider at the minister's house, and then Grace and Yates walked back to the boarding house through the snow. They had decided to keep running the establishment together, with Yates helping out when he was not working at the ranch. It would not be an easy life, but it would be theirs. That night, as they lay together in what was now their shared bedroom, Yates said, "Tell me what you are thinking." Grace turned to face him in the darkness. "I am thinking about how different my life is now compared to 2 years ago. I am thinking about how close I came to never letting myself feel this way again. And I am thinking about how grateful I am that you did not give up on me." "I could never give up on you," Yates said, pulling her closer. "You are worth fighting for, worth waiting for. I knew that from the first moment I saw you. I did not make it easy. Nothing worth having is easy." He kissed her forehead. "But you are worth every difficult moment, every wall I had to help you break down, every fear I had to help you face. You are worth everything, Grace." "So are you," she whispered. "You saved me, Yates. You showed me that my life was not over just because I had experienced a tragedy. You showed me that I could be happy again." "We saved each other," Yates corrected. "You gave me a reason to stop running and I gave you a reason to start living. That is what true love is, Grace. It is two people making each other better, stronger, more complete." As Grace drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about Thomas and the love they had shared, the life that had been stolen from them. She thought about the 2 years of grief and isolation, of building walls and pushing people away. And she thought about Yates, about his patience and kindness and unwavering belief in her worth. She had believed no man could love her again, not after everything she had been through. But Yates had proven her wrong. He had shown her what true love was, not just passion and romance, but patience and acceptance and commitment. He had loved her when she was at her worst, when she was prickly and defensive and broken. And he had waited for her to heal, never pushing, never demanding, just being there. As the winter slowly gave way to spring, Grace and Yates settled into married life. They worked together to run the boarding house, and Grace found that having a partner made everything easier and more enjoyable. Yates would help with the heavy chores, fixing things that broke and hauling supplies from town. Grace taught him to cook, and though he was not naturally talented in the kitchen, he tried his best and made her laugh with his earnest efforts. The other residents of Jordan Valley gradually accepted their relationship, and Grace found herself becoming part of the community in a way she had never been before. She joined the ladies' auxiliary at the church, helping to organize social events and charity drives. She made friends with some of the other ranchers' wives, women who had initially been suspicious of her, but who warmed to her once they got to know her. One April afternoon, as Grace worked in the small garden she had planted behind the boarding house, she felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She sat back on her heels, pressing a hand to her stomach, and suddenly realized what this might mean. She had missed her monthly courses, something she had attributed to stress, but now she wondered if there might be another explanation. That evening she told Yates her suspicion, and the joy on his face was almost comical. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hands going to her still flat stomach. "Not completely, but I think so. All the signs are there." Yates pulled her into a careful embrace as if she might break. "We are going to have a baby. Grace, we are going to be parents. Are you happy about it?" Grace asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy? I am beyond happy. I am ecstatic." He pulled back to look at her face. "Are you happy about it?" Grace thought about the question, examining her feelings carefully. There was fear, certainly, worry about all the things that could go wrong. But underneath that was a profound joy, a sense of excitement about bringing a new life into the world with this man she loved so much. "Yes," she said. "I am happy. I am terrified, but I am happy." As the months passed and Grace's pregnancy progressed, Yates became even more attentive and protective. He insisted she not do any heavy lifting, and he took over most of the physically demanding chores around the boarding house. Grace found his concern endearing, even when it bordered on excessive. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," she protested one day when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I know, but I want to take care of you," Yates said. "You are carrying our child. That is the most important job in the world, and I want to make sure you have everything you need." Grace softened at his words. "What I need is for you to stop treating me like I might shatter at any moment. I am strong, Yates. I can handle normal activities." "I know you are strong, but let me do this for you anyway. Let me show you how much I love you by making your life easier." It was hard to argue with that logic, so Grace allowed Yates to pamper her, even as she maintained her independence in other ways. She continued to run the boarding house, cook meals, and manage the finances. She just let Yates handle the things that required heavy lifting or extended physical exertion. As autumn returned to Jordan Valley and Grace's belly grew round with their child, she found herself thinking often about the future. She imagined a little boy with Yates's storm-gray eyes or a little girl with her honey-colored hair. She imagined teaching their child to raid and cook and appreciate the beauty of the high desert. She imagined Yates teaching their son or daughter to ride and rope and appreciate hard work. But she also found herself thinking about the child she would never have with Thomas, the life they had planned that had been cut short. She felt guilty sometimes, as if she was betraying his memory by being happy with someone else. One evening, she shared these feelings with Yates. "I feel like I am forgetting him," she said as they sat together watching the sunset. "Like by moving on and being happy with you, I am erasing what Thomas and I had." Yates took her hand. "You are not forgetting him, Grace. You are honoring him by living the kind of full, joyful life he would have wanted for you. He loved you, and people who truly love someone want them to be happy, even if that happiness comes after they are gone. How do you always know exactly what to say?" "Because I love you, and I pay attention to what you need." He shifted so he could put his arm around her shoulders. "Thomas will always be part of your story, Grace. He shaped who you became, and that is nothing to be ashamed of. But your story did not end when he died. You get to have a whole life, with all its joys and sorrows and surprises, and I am honored to be part of that life." Grace leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers and the gentle flutter of their baby moving inside her. "I love you so much. Sometimes it scares me how much I love you. Good scared or bad scared. Both, maybe. I am scared of losing you, but I am also scared of how empty my life would be without you. You have become essential to me, Yates. I do not know how I survived before you came along. You survived because you are strong and resilient and brave, but now you do not have to just survive. Now you get to thrive, and I get to watch you do it." In December, just before Christmas, Grace went into labor. The local midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Sullivan, came to the boarding house to assist with the delivery. Yates paced in the hallway outside their bedroom, unable to sit still, his worry for Grace evident on his face. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the following day. Grace had never experienced pain like this, wave after wave of contractions that left her gasping and exhausted. But each time she thought she could not endure another moment, she would hear Yates's voice through the door, calling out encouragement, and she would find the strength to continue. Finally, as the afternoon sun streamed through the bedroom window, Grace gave one final push and heard the thin, wavering cry of a newborn baby. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by overwhelming love when Mrs. Sullivan placed the tiny, squirming infant in her arms. "It is a boy," the midwife announced with a smile. "A healthy, strong boy." Yates burst through the door before anyone could tell him it was all right to enter. His eyes were red as if he had been crying, and his face was pale with worry. But when he saw Grace holding their son, his entire expression transformed into pure joy. "Grace, you did it. You were amazing." He knelt beside the bed and looked down at the baby in her arms. "He is so small." "He is perfect," Grace said, running a finger along the baby's soft cheek. "Look at him, Yates. We made this little person." "What should we name him?" Yates asked, unable to take his eyes off his son. Grace had thought about this question for months, considering dozens of possibilities. But looking down at her baby's face, she suddenly knew exactly what felt right. "I want to name him Thomas Xavier. After the man who loved me first and gave his life for me, and with your name to show that he belongs to the man who loved me back to life." Yates's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure? I do not want you to feel obligated. I am sure. Thomas was a good man who deserved to be remembered, and I want our son to know that story, to understand that love can endure even through tragedy." "Then Thomas he is." Yates leaned over and kissed Grace's forehead. "Thank you for giving me this gift. Thank you for trusting me with your heart. Thank you for making me the happiest man alive." As the three of them sat together in the quiet afternoon light, Grace felt a sense of completion she had never experienced before. Her journey had been long and painful, filled with loss and grief and fear. But it had led her here, to this moment, to this family. She had survived heartbreak and learned to love again. She had faced her fears and found the courage to open her heart. And now she had a husband who cherished her and a son who would grow up surrounded by love. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were harsh winters when money was tight, summers when drought threatened the ranchers' herds and thus the boarding house business. There were sleepless nights when baby Thomas was colicky, and later when he was teething. There were moments when Grace's old fears would resurface, when she would worry about losing Yates the way she had lost Thomas. But through it all, Yates remained steadfast. He was a devoted husband and an attentive father, always putting his family first. He continued to work at the ranch, but he also took on more responsibilities at the boarding house, allowing Grace to focus on raising their son. He would come home dusty and tired from a long day of work, but his face would light up when Thomas ran to greet him, and he would scoop the boy up and spin him around until they were both laughing. When Thomas was 2 years old, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she was less anxious and more excited, confident in her ability to handle the challenges of childbirth and motherhood. Yates was overjoyed at the prospect of expanding their family, though he fussed over Grace even more than he had during her first pregnancy. Their second child, a daughter they named Caroline, arrived in the spring of 1885. She had Grace's honey-colored hair and Yates's storm-gray eyes, and from the moment she was born, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. Yates would sit for hours holding her, singing soft songs and telling her stories even though she was too young to understand. "You are going to spoil her," Grace teased one evening, watching her husband cradle their daughter with infinite tenderness. "So what if I do?" Yates replied with a grin. "She deserves to be spoiled. Look at this perfect little face. How could anyone resist?" Grace laughed and shook her head, but she loved seeing this side of her husband. He was so gentle with their children, so patient and loving. He was the kind of father every child deserved, and Grace was grateful every day that her children would grow up with his love and guidance. As Thomas and Caroline grew, the boarding house evolved with them. Grace converted one of the guest rooms into a nursery, and later into a proper bedroom for the children to share. The other guests, mostly cowboys and ranch hands, became like uncles to the children, teaching Thomas to tie knots and Caroline to identify different types of rocks and plants. The community of Jordan Valley embraced the Xavier family fully. Grace was no longer the mysterious widow who kept to herself. She was now Mrs. Xavier, a respected businesswoman and mother, someone people turned to for advice and support. She organized church socials and helped new families settle in town. She became friends with the schoolteacher and worked to improve the town's small schoolhouse. One summer evening, when Thomas was 6 and Caroline was 4, the family took a walk after supper to enjoy the cooler air. The children ran ahead, chasing grasshoppers and collecting interesting stones, while Grace and Yates walked hand in hand. "You remember when I first came to your boarding house?" Yates asked suddenly. Grace smiled. "How could I forget? I was so rude to you, so determined to keep you at arm's length." "You were not rude. You were protecting yourself, which was completely understandable." He squeezed her hand. "But I am glad I did not give up. So am I. I cannot imagine my life without you now. You and the children, you are everything to me. You gave me everything too, you know. Before I met you, I did not know what I was looking for. I just kept moving from place to place, always searching for something I could not name. But it was you, Grace. You were what I was searching for all along." Grace stopped walking and turned to face her husband. The evening light cast a golden glow over his features, highlighting the laugh lines around his eyes and the silver that had begun to thread through his dark hair. He was not the young cowboy who had first walked into her boarding house, and she was not the broken widow who had pushed everyone away. They had both grown and changed, shaped by the life they had built together. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" for showing me what true love is, for proving that I was worthy of being loved again, for being patient with me when I was difficult, for giving me a family and a future, for everything." Yates cupped her face in his hands. "Grace, you never needed me to show you that you were worthy of love. You always were. I just needed to help you remember." They kissed then, a gentle kiss full of affection and history and commitment. When they broke apart, they saw their children watching them with matching expressions of curiosity and slight embarrassment. "Why are you always kissing?" Thomas asked, wrinkling his nose. "Because we love each other," Grace explained, reaching out to tousle her son's hair. "And when you love someone, you want to show them how you feel." "I love Caroline," Thomas said, "but I do not want to kiss her." "That is a different kind of love," Yates said with a laugh. "You will understand when you are older." As they continued their walk, the children running ahead once more, Grace reflected on how much her life had changed. She thought about the terrified woman she had been, convinced that she would never be happy again, that no man could love her after everything she had been through. And she thought about the man who had proven her wrong, who had broken through her defenses with patience and kindness and unwavering devotion. Years continued to pass, bringing more changes and challenges. The boarding house remained successful, providing a steady income that allowed the Xavier family to live comfortably. Yates eventually became foreman at the ranch where he worked, a position that recognized his skills and dedication. Thomas grew into a thoughtful, intelligent boy who loved books and learning. Caroline became a spirited, independent girl who was equally comfortable helping her mother in the kitchen or following her father around the ranch. When Grace turned 30, Yates threw her a surprise party at the boarding house, inviting everyone they knew in Jordan Valley. Grace was overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection from the community, by the realization of how much her life had changed. She was no longer an outsider, no longer isolated by grief. She was part of something larger, connected to these people and this place in meaningful ways. Late in the evening, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Grace and Yates sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "This was a wonderful day," Grace said, leaning her head on Yates's shoulder. "Thank you for organizing it." "You deserve to be celebrated," Yates replied. "You have given so much to this community, to our family. I wanted everyone to have a chance to show you how much you are appreciated." Grace was quiet for a moment, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this point. "Do you know what today made me realize?" "What is that?" "That I am happy, truly, completely happy. For a long time I did not think I would ever be able to say that again, but I am, Yates, and it is because of you." "It is because of you too," Yates insisted. "You did the hard work of healing, of learning to trust again. I just walked alongside you while you did it. You did more than that. You showed me what love could be when it was given freely, without conditions or expectations. You loved me when I was at my worst, when I had nothing to offer you but pain and baggage, and you never wavered, never gave up on me." Yates turned to face her, his eyes serious. "Grace, I need you to understand something. Loving you has never been a burden or a sacrifice. It has been the greatest privilege of my life. Every day I wake up next to you is a gift. Every moment I spend with you and our children is a blessing. You did not need to earn my love or prove you were worthy of it. You always were." Grace felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, tears of gratitude and joy. "I love you so much, more than I ever thought possible. I love you too. Forever." As they sat together under the stars, Grace thought about Thomas, her first love, and sent a silent thank you to him for loving her in a way that taught her what she deserved. She thought about the tragedy that had nearly destroyed her and the strength she had found to survive it. And she thought about Yates, her second chance, her proof that love could heal even the deepest wounds. She had believed no man could love her again, that her heart was too broken, her pain too great. But Yates had proven her wrong. He had shown her what true love was, patient, kind, unwavering. He had given her a family, a home, a future. He had given her life again. And as the years continued to unfold, as Thomas and Caroline grew into wonderful young adults, as Grace and Yates grew old together in the town they had made their home, she never forgot the lesson he had taught her. Love was not something to be feared, but something to be embraced. It was not a guarantee of pain, but a promise of joy. And while loving someone always carried the risk of loss, the alternative was a life half lived, a heart half open. Grace chose to love fully, to live fully, to embrace every moment she was given. And in doing so, she discovered that true love was not just about being loved by someone else. It was about allowing yourself to be vulnerable, about trusting someone with your deepest fears and greatest hopes, about building a life together one day at a time. When Thomas grew up, he became a teacher, educated and thoughtful, carrying forward his mother's love of learning and his father's dedication to helping others. He married a kind woman named Sarah, and they gave Grace and Yates 3 grandchildren who filled the boarding house with laughter and chaos during their visits. Caroline followed a different path, becoming a rancher in her own right, taking over the operation where her father had worked for so many years. She married a cowboy named Daniel who respected her independence and supported her dreams. Together they expanded the ranch and became one of the most successful operations in the region. As Grace and Yates entered their later years, they gradually handed over the day-to-day operations of the boarding house to a young couple they had mentored. But they remained in Jordan Valley, in the home they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sun set over the Awahi Mountains just as they had done thousands of times before, Yates said, "I have been thinking about our life together." "And," Grace prompted, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. "And I realize that I am the luckiest man who ever lived. I got to spend my life with the most incredible woman, raising amazing children, building something meaningful. Not many people get that, Grace. Not many people get to experience the kind of love we have." Grace smiled, her face lined with age but her eyes still bright. "I am the lucky one. You saved my life, Yates, not in a dramatic, heroic way, but in the most important way. You saved me from a life of loneliness and fear. You showed me that my story was not over, that I had so much more to experience and feel and give." "We saved each other," Yates said, as he had said so many times over the years. "That is what true love does." As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, Grace reflected on the decades that had passed since Yates first walked into her boarding house. She thought about all the moments that had brought them to this place. The conversations over coffee, the dinners washed in companionable silence, the first tentative kiss, the wedding that had marked her new beginning, the births of their children, the countless ordinary days that had woven together to create an extraordinary life. She had believed no man could love her again after watching Thomas die. She had been so certain that her capacity for love had been destroyed, that she would spend the rest of her life alone and empty. But Yates Xavier, a cowboy passing through Jordan Valley on his way to somewhere else, had stopped and stayed. He had seen past her defenses to the wounded heart beneath. He had been patient when she was difficult, kind when she was cold, and unwavering when she was uncertain. He had shown her what true love was, and in doing so, he had given her back her life. As darkness fell and the stars emerged one by one in the vast Oregon sky, Grace and Yates remained on their porch, hands clasped, hearts intertwined. They did not need words anymore. After so many years together, they could communicate in silence, in the comfort of shared presence. But finally, Grace spoke, saying the words she had said 1,000 times but which never lost their meaning. "Thank you for loving me." And Yates replied, as he always did, "Thank you for letting me." They sat together long into the night, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life of love and meaning in the wild, beautiful landscape of the American West. Grace had learned that the heart was more resilient than she had ever imagined, capable of healing and loving again, even after unimaginable pain. She had learned that true love was not about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone who was willing to stand by you through imperfection, who chose you every single day. And as the years finally drew to their close, as Grace and Yates lived out their days in the home they had made, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, they did so with the knowledge that they had gotten it right. They had loved each other well, completely, faithfully. They had built something that would endure long after they were gone, a legacy of love that would inspire generations to come in the end. That was all anyone could ask for. A life fully lived, a heart fully given, and a love that transformed everything it touched. Grace Gardner had believed no man could love her again, but Yates Xavier had proven her wrong, and in doing so, he had given them both the greatest gift imaginable. He had given them a love story for the ages, set against the rugged beauty of the Oregon high desert, a testament to the power of second chances and the resilience of the human heart. And when their story finally came to an end, when both of them had lived long, full lives and passed peacefully surrounded by the family they had created, the people of Jordan Valley told their story to anyone who would listen. They told of the widow who thought she could never love again and the cowboy who proved her wrong. They told of patience and perseverance, of healing and hope, of building a life together one day at a time. It became the kind of story that gave hope to broken hearts everywhere, a reminder that love could endure, that second chances existed, that it was never too late to open your heart again. The boarding house remained standing for decades after, a landmark in Jordan Valley, and people would point to it and say, "That is where Grace and Yates fell in love. That is where their story began." And though Grace and Yates were gone, their love remained, woven into the very fabric of the town they had called home, proof that true love never really dies. It transforms and endures, inspiring others to be brave enough to love, to trust, to believe in the possibility of happiness even after heartbreak. Grace Gardner had believed no man could love her again, but Yates Xavier had said, "Let me show you what true love is." And he had spent the rest of his life proving it, one day, one moment, one act of devotion at a time. Their story was complete, their love fulfilled, their legacy secure. They had lived and loved and built something beautiful together, and in the end, that was everything.